Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashish Kaushal, CEO of HireTalent. Welcome to the next edition of the Future of Contingent Workforce Buyer's Perspective. Today, we're going to talk about some of the predictions and priorities for 2026. I know 2025 was very surprising. I don't think anyone predicted that they had to navigate tariffs and how to deal with all the dynamic changes that were happening across our country from policy and from a business standpoint, as well as AI. So today we're really excited to see what 2026 will be like. It might be even more challenging this year, depending on what disruption happens, the shifting in geopolitics and advances in AI, which has caused its own challenges, as well as inflation, shifting behaviors of consumers. Having all said that, we have this amazing panel of guests who are going to give us our year-end check-in about contingent workforce trends for 2026 and how 2025 went. Our special guests are Nancy Miller, founder of Zen Solutions LLC, Dominic, Furina, category manager at Munich Re America, and then Jacquelynn Voss, global external workforce program manager at PerkinElmer. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashish.
Well, good morning.
Morning. Sorry, it's a little bit sunny here.
It's not a bad thing.
As a buyer, what are your priorities for contingent workforce for 2026? What do you see coming down the pipeline?
So, I mean, for me as a buyer in general, it's the visibility and control specifically around compliance. I think that organizations are going to realize that a significant portion of their spend and rogue spend, right, is probably within the contingent workforce space, or at least some type of staffing space. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't really been managed closely, right? Mm-hmm. So there's rogue spend and compliance issues there, quality impacts. So just a lot of like visibility impacts across the board. So for me, I think it's really just around auditing and reclassifying, ensuring that the classifications are correct, that we're maintaining compliance, as well as strengthening our visibility into what that spend looks like and how we're utilizing that spend.
Interesting. And are you including the SOW as part of the CW spend?
Yeah, so that will be included in what's being evaluated going into 2026.
Okay, great. And Dominic?
Yeah, I would definitely second that. It's a lot of visibility and control. I joined the organization October of 2024, so it's been quite a learning curve. I came from the supplier side, so it's a different look on everything. In this coming year, I've already started trying to kind of define what our contingent workforce policy is going to look like. There was a draft done previously, but luckily I was able to kind of pick it up and continue to move things forward than they were done in the past. The SOW spend is quite significantly higher than the contingent spend, right? If we're kind of part of compartmentalizing those two things, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of collaboration with my other category managers and trying to figure out where the overlap is with these vendors and where we're kind of bucketing them.
I think that's a really good point, Dominic, to be in partnership, not just like it shouldn't just. The contingent workforce strategy shouldn't just be siloed to HR or TA or procurement, right? Like it takes all three and legal in order to get everything really rolling in a clean fashion where everything is being monitored the way that it should. So it takes a village to ensure compliance and proper spend and that the contracts are written correctly. So it's definitely not a one-person job for sure.
It's interesting, Dominic, he's talked about, like, because you both have talked about compliance as one of the trends for 2026 and control. And if you look at 2025, I always call SOW some other work, which basically means that if you don't want to follow the rules that contingent created, then you put it in the some other bucket, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a way to sort of get around the rule. And maybe the rules were kind of archaic and they were dated back to 2001. And so probably the CW rules need to change for people not to go around the program. So having said that, if compliance is a big driver for next year, would you guys say that you're going to see a lot more flow from SOW back into CW if they want to follow the rules?
I would say so. Go ahead, Nancy.
No, I was just going to say, I think it depends on, I think it depends on what you're defining as compliance, right? Is it rogue spend? Is it people not following the policy, et cetera? Going back to your first question, actually, the first thing that popped into my mind is if I'm in a buyer seat, I'm looking at my roadmap. If I don't have a roadmap, I'm furiously creating one. And I'm editing it and continuing to re-edit it based on all of the fun stuff. As you rattled off all of these things in the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like if you don't have all of these things, you're not thinking about them, take a look at that roadmap. And I think one of the themes this year that I heard from buyers in general in my own experience was that SOW typically is still not making it into the full program. So this might be a year where from that compliance lens, that kind of helps push it forward. I know it's been a struggle in the industry to consistently get SOW into a program. So yes, it could start to flow back or it could just be in addition to what you're doing currently at your program and should be.
And Nancy, going back to my first question, so what are you seeing? Because I know you get a perspectives from different clients. What are you seeing in terms of priorities that they're talking about?
A couple, I think compliance is sort of it's the theme. And as we were even prepping for this, it's like, compliance is not the sexy stuff, but when things go wrong, it becomes a really, really big deal. So yeah, in the midst of, trying to still control costs and do all of that other fun stuff that CW buyers are tasked with doing, throwing that compliance in, I think that's going to be huge. I think that's something that's really forefront. And there isn't when I think about things like candidate fraud, for example, and we'll probably dive into that more when we get into our AI conversation, which could go on for hours and hours. But that's it's new, it's really sticky. It's a really tough nut to crack. So I think, again, like going back to that compliance, it's not the fun stuff, but it's becoming the thing that you really need to sit down and focus on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The other thing that you brought into, I just thought of, and this is kind of a curveball maybe, but given that the big beautiful bill is coming into effect in January, and they're allowing companies to write off capital expenses at 100% year one, I'm wondering if that's also going to sort of push people into SOW project-based solutions because they can get a huge tax deduction for that year, or if companies are going to figure out how to allow the same sort of capital deduction through contingent labor. And I think those that figure that out will probably end up getting cost savings plus a big deduction. If there's a possibility.
I think that's where you have to be really careful about how you're utilizing the definitions. And I'm going to steal a phrase from my old manager, words matter, right? So the way that you are classifying the workers and the definitions of how those SOWs are defined is becoming increasingly important, right? You cannot have something that you consider a project, right? But you're paying them hourly and it's on time and materials, right? So it has to be deliverable based. So just ensuring that the language that's being used is consistent with what is compliant, right? So I think it's a good workaround, but how compliant make it within the organization? Like how far can you stretch that job description to make it fit that box?
Yeah, and so Jacquelynn, I guess for our next question is how do you define the channels and definitions around the channels, right? Because you have contingent labor, you have SOW, you have labor that just kind of does temp work on a credit card. There's a lot of different channels that we're getting people from. And then you have the FMSs and things like that as well. So how would you sort of define the world of staffing?
How would I define the world of staffing? I mean, if we're talking about contingent workers, right? I mean, type of taxonomy, clarity for your organization so that everybody's on the same page in terms of the words that you're using. Like I said, words matter. So if I'm calling someone a contractor, right? Like, is that the same thing as an independent contractor, or is it a contractor that's a W-2 temp resource, right? So you have to make sure that those definitions are clear within your organization and that they align with legal definitions out in the workspace. So making sure that there's the control and direction from a legal perspective would be the first part. Understanding what's allowed within that particular classification and what's prohibited within that particular classification. Understanding what the duration limitations are within each country. So for the global programs, knowing that you can't have contingent workers on a contract basis for more than 3 years in Poland, and that might not be 100% accurate. I'm just throwing an example out there, but there's no tenure limits within other countries, right? So just understanding from a global perspective what you're up against, and then defining based around those particular nuances.
Interesting. Dominic, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, because definitely difficult to put those definitions down on paper. And a starting point is really just to kind of get a skeletal definition, and don't get too much into the weeds, because this does not need to be perfect day one. This is something that's going to be revisited every couple of years, and could potentially be redefined in the future. But yes, exactly what Jacquelynn said, understanding the global policies and what the terminology is elsewhere, and trying to make that seamless kind of across the organization, so there's a little bit more continuity.
Nancy?
Yeah, I'll do a shameless plug for consulting, but I think that's where if zero and you're kind of having trouble communicating those definitions, because they can be very wonky, and of course we love our acronyms in this industry, is getting somebody to kind of sit down and help you put that together, right? And talking to the different areas of the business who probably call it something else because at their former company they called it that, and so there's kind of that change management with it too. But I think kind of going back to those definitions and then the roadmap and having some of those building blocks in place is really going to help you move forward. But yeah, it can definitely be very tricky.
Interesting. Dominic, I'm going to throw you a question. So you mentioned in the beginning that you came from the vendor side, both from staffing VMS, and then now you're on the corporate side. What would you wish you knew on the vendor side that you know now on the corporate side?
Oh my God, what I knew. I mean, I tried to sell into Munich Re for years. I think knowing that on this side, it's still very much a sales job in getting the program up and running and supported and utilized. It is very much a understanding who the main players are, not only locally but globally, and trying to align on really what the larger strategies of the organization is. It's still very much relationship driven, but I think just knowing that we're all kind of working towards the same goal, and no one's really trying to work against you. It's just there's a lot more coming in from all areas when you're on the buyer side. So navigating that definitely would have been helpful.
Interesting. And then Nancy, I know that you've recently come out and built your own consulting company. And what are some perspectives you have on that journey, starting out in there?
Yeah, I've sort of been doing this as a side gig for almost 2 years. Started off just doing a little bit of writing work, and then just through networks, people have tapped me for different things. But yeah, there's always, the question of, what's new and different, and what should I be doing? What are other people doing? Everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing. Probably more so just as a validation, because there's no, you can't go to school for contingent workforce. So you have to find out what are some of the best practices in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think that the common theme is, you know, I think we're all learning together. I think, you know, Dominic nailed it in that it's always a sales, regardless. Everyone sells, whether you're in the buyer side or the supplier side, and really driving adoption. Adoption is always a really difficult thing, no matter what side you're on. But yeah, I think we're all, you know, solving similar challenges in different ways and trying to figure out how to deal with the what's now, what's next, and what's later. That's a common theme.
No, interesting. I mean, I love that you're both saying that it's sales on both sides and it's always about relationships. And Jacquelynn, you also remind me of this because I remember in July or August we talked and you had just left your job and you're looking for a new role. And I was like, come to CWS and build it up. And then you took that to another level because you built your network and then you started a LinkedIn channel.
Yeah.
And advised others on how to get a job while you were still looking for yours. So
yeah.
I'd like to hear more about that too.
I mean, I think we're always selling, right? Whether it's selling to our stakeholders and getting their buy-in on the program ideas, or you're on the sell side and you're selling a program to the buy side, or you are looking for an opportunity and you're selling yourself into an organization, your value, right? So I think you always kind of have to be in sell mode to be successful in this particular realm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I wanted to make sure we brought those out. Going back to 2026, are you guys seeing, did you see a lot more misclassification happening in 2025?
I wouldn't say a lot more because we're still uncovering things, but it's definitely there.
Yeah.
It's I don't depending on what company you're at. I don't know if there was really much measurement happening previously.
Yeah.
Business as usual. Now we're looking to do some different things and kind of enhance what our organization is doing across the board with some of these major projects that are happening simultaneously. There has been a directive to look at those SOWs because we have process in place of approvals and things like that everyone's got to go through a purchase order and that whole process. But there has been some more directive as to be more diligent in reviewing those SOWs, reviewing the terms, understanding how the invoicing is going to be carried out, and knowing that if it's truly an SOW project work or if this is time and materials.
Interesting. Nancy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it has become increasingly more difficult. If you work in a global organization, to the points made earlier, you really have to be paying attention to what those different rules are in the different countries. And even if you have a US program, but someone wants to leverage talent in another country, now all of a sudden you're global, whether you knew it or not. And so I think that's becoming increasingly difficult. Talent marketplaces popping up, the whole gig economy. I'm an example of that, established an LLC, right? So now I fit into the gig economy as well. And so there's just a lot of different moving pieces. So whether or not we actually saw it or someone could say measured it, I think it's been there. And as things become a little more increasingly challenging, I think it's going to be a continued thing to focus on.
Interesting. I wonder, you said international, so I wonder, there's another tariff in the works potentially on services. And so I wonder if that's going to change people's cost structures, because if you have a person, you're getting taxed on that by 20%.
The tax thing is not something I claim to know a lot about, but you throw that into everything else with the, just DOL rules and all of that, and it gets really yucky.
Yeah. We've also been seeing, and I think so AI has overall, I think, been a positive thing, but there's also been an increase in candidate fraud and resume, I guess, not really representing who you are as a person or what you've done. So how are you all looking at candidate fraud, and what are you seeing both from internally and both from a vendor side that's creative to sort of help minimize this impact?
I'll take first crack at it. I mean, we do have a very extensive recruitment team for our full-time hiring. So we tend to do a very large percentage of our full-time hiring in-house. So I mean, they have their own tools. I'm not too much involved in that process. My responsibility lies more on the supplier side, and I think that it's really on the trust of the partners that I think just even having those supplier partnerships mitigate some of that risk, because they are ultimately supposed to be doing all the initial phone screens and interviews before sending it. We know that there's some recruiters that might just fire away. That's always going to be there. But I mean, when you talk about resumes, everyone one point or another embellishes, right? So there's always that aspect. It's that fake it till you make it, right, type of mentality, just to get your foot in the door. But that's what everyone's fighting for, is just that opportunity, and you hope that they're embellishing in a way that they can still back it up and perform. But yeah, I mean, there's so much challenges around that.
Yeah, I want to make sure, like, there's a very big distinction between like embellishing and essentially what some would consider lying, right, on your resume, and enhancing the language on your resume, right? So there's a difference there, right? You can be, and I was just working with somebody recently on their resume, and they're at that just coming out of the junior level, right? So seating the language on the resume, and she was nervous because she's like, I feel like it's not authentic to who I am. And I said, and that's fine, right? Like, if we want to revert back to lighter language, that's okay. But also keep in mind, you're saying the same thing, but you're just using more business friendly, elevated language that you'll probably find on job descriptions. And it's kind of a way, going back to AI, to circumvent those AI scanners, right? That are scanning the resume, is looking for those keywords, right? So if you can elevate the language on your resume, it's not necessary. You're not necessarily embellishing it. You're just talking to it a little bit differently and more articulately.
Yeah.
If articulately is a word.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think Dominic touched on it a little bit as far as the supplier partnerships go. And I think, also kind of weaving back, Jacquelynn, to what you said about rogue spend and all of those things. And I think that's why all of that becomes more important, to have everything under that umbrella, because if you have managers just working with random vendors, you have absolutely no idea what their practices are. So if you have a nice tight knit supply group, you really understand what their recruiting practices are. And quite frankly, they have a lot more on the line. If you have 3 to 4 good suppliers versus if they're one of 50, right? Yeah. So if your program still has 15 suppliers working on one requisition, and you've got a base of 100 suppliers, like, supplier optimization should really be a thing. And when you're doing that, it's performance and it's cost, yes, but it's also asking those questions around screening practices and what they're doing for candidate fraud, and what some of those penalties potentially could be. So, getting them to have more skin in the game, that's something you can look at as well. But really, I think comes back to that partnership mentality, and not just, having a whole bunch of suppliers in your program and or allowing your managers to just go and grab whoever without really understanding what they should be doing to help prevent that.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, Nancy, and not saturating the market with your postings, right, in your openings, and making sure that there is a intentional search for the people that you want in the role, and creating those more intimate relationships with the suppliers, as opposed to, hey, just go find a butt for this seat, right? Like, what do you actually need, right, for the role, and how can we get the quality talent into the position for you? is really what those supplier conversations should look like. If you have a list of 100 suppliers, you're never going to have the opportunity to have those conversations. Mm-hmm. So it really does need to get shortlisted and drilled down.
Yeah.
And then you got your last line of defense of the background checks to really assist.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. So like in 2025, I did find a lot more like also fraud from a standpoint where you have like North Korean spies that are infiltrating some American companies, right? And so they're using AI to like sort of show that they're even changing their face, right? And so they're making look like they're American. And so we ended up having to do a lot of different steps. And so one was we try to check your IP address, but again, you could sort of shadow that and filter that and say you're in another country. And then we'd use AI to sort of match the resume to the LinkedIn profile to make sure it was legit, or at least if there's any inconsistencies, like how do we flag that quickly? But ultimately, it came down to Dominic, like, let's pretend you're a North Korean spy, and you're saying you live in Dallas, Texas, and I'd be like, okay, so we're asking all these questions, you're passing them all of the technical aspects of it. I'm like, so you grew up in Dallas, what's your favorite restaurant? And that would be like the question that would get them. It's a human element. They're not figuring out that piece of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm saying that is because AI and tech is important, but ultimately you can't get around some of the human behaviors that we all know, you know?
For sure.
And I think with that too, you know, add this to your buyer list for next year is making sure that your managers are aware and that they have something in their toolkit that they can be using when they're interviewing these candidates. And then even post-hire, what are those expectations for your hiring managers around, you know, if you've got someone that is remote on the first day, making sure that you're having a video Teams or whatever you use to say, hey, welcome. And you're kind of almost reiterating, you know, to your point, like, hey, how's the weather in Dallas today? Did you try any new restaurants over the weekend, right? You want to make sure that your hiring community, your managers know what to do when they're interviewing and they know what to do after the fact and what are some of those red flags. And then what do I do if I think that I have an issue and having a path for them to raise that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good, great points. So let's continue down the path of AI. In the age of AI, we're going at super speed, but we also have some increasing compliance complexities. How do you balance that? And then what are the trade-offs? And then I will tell you personally, like I get a lot of RFPs where it says, how do you leverage AI? And then do you agree not to use it with us? and so how are you looking at AI today? And then are you welcoming it within your organizations and your vendor supply chain?
So I think AI is a wonderful tool, right? But it is not it's a tool to a solution. It is not the solution, right? Yeah. So when I think about it, I think AI can be really helpful when you're trying to reduce like manual tasks, right? But if there is something that needs a judgment call and the judgment is required or the human interaction is required, that's where, you know, that line in the sand really needs to be drawn. Like, we can't use AI for this because we actually need the human element here. And I think that's where a lot of companies might be jumping the gun on their AI usage right now. And what may potentially happen is that they will see that they still need the human element for the judgment calls and the relationship building, and pull back and probably start to rehire some of those individuals that were let go for AI use.
Absolutely. Dominic?
Yeah, we've certainly have heard of that already happening. But for Munich Re, I mean, definitely looking at AI as a benefit in certain areas, claims, things like that. We're a big reinsurance company, so a lot of that is a benefit for processing and sources of revenue. We do have biweekly forums for AI as a global community. We utilize a few tools in-house, similar like your ChatGPT, things like that. And then we'll kind of reconvene every other week to go through, use cases and how it's benefited from various aspects, legal, procurement, all other functions there. So we are doing that, but there is a lot of checks and balances that go into it, board level approvals if we're looking to bring in anything new. So there is certainly a lot of scrutiny.
Interesting. And Nancy, are you seeing trends in adoption?
Yeah, I actually read something yesterday that said when it comes to AI, there's a lot of opinions and not a lot of execution, which I thought was hilarious. But, when I think about from the buyer seat, I think an important thing talking about relationships is knowing, who and or what team is dedicated to that, right? So, from your supplier side, for example, if, an RFP and they want to know what kind of AI you're using or how you're using it, it's not just, hey, we're doing it for this, but also here's sort of the thoughts and controls that we have around it. So when you talk about how you use it, it's not just the what, but it's the how. And then, if I'm looking at an RFP from the buyer side, I'm taking that information and I'm partnering with my internal person or team that's responsible for that AI governance, which hopefully there is somebody. And I'm making sure that those two things jive. I think that, what's challenging is, we're all really good at contingent workforce, but we're not techie folks, right? For the most part. So, who is your partner, both on your supplier side and internally, that can help kind of translate and make sure that it's the right fit for what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. I love also that you talked about governance and AI, and that we need to really think about that before we let it into our systems and adopt it. And then I also love in Dominic's organization, the weekly or semi-weekly discussions on how to leverage AI and what it can do for you, which also talks about, I'm sure covers governance, but efficiency, and also takes a little bit of the fear factor out of it, right? Like, how do we adopt this in a way that's productive? Because I also think that what's happened in the last, it's like 1997 with the internet. They said it would change everything, and it didn't change anything for 3 years. And then all of a sudden it did change everything, right? But you needed time. And so I think right now it's created more work than it's actually helped, but eventually it's going to turn into an efficiency tool.
I think that's what's cool about where we are too, is, this is sort of the messy middle. It's here, it's happening, but we don't have standardized governance and practices around it and the when and the how to use it. So this is where, it's kind of a make or break as people are digging in and trying to figure it all out. And the messy middle is messy, but that's really where the important and sometimes really cool work happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What were you going to say, Dominic?
Oh, I was just going to say, once the whole craze really started being prominent, it was as if everyone immediately had an AI solution. So then it became a little overwhelming. And everyone's coming to the table with AI, but is it specific to solving the need at hand? So
yeah,
just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of noise there, and half the stuff doesn't really work right now. But
and I think in our industry, what's interesting is the supplier side, the MSPs, the staffing companies are working a lot on AI that's going to help them be more efficient and successful, right? Margins are slimming, and that's, all those things are great. Not that they shouldn't be doing that. But then you go to a buyer and you say, hey, we're using AI, and we're like, awesome. How can this help my program? And you're like, oh, well, it's, we've automated our back office, and, that saves us money, but it doesn't. So, just because a company is using AI from a buyer's seat doesn't necessarily mean it's impacting you. So
Yeah.
I think there's some questions to be asked there. If you're reading RFPs or you're, talking to sales folks about AI.
Absolutely. And I think we have to kind of, I'm actually pro AI. I think it's created a lot of efficiencies and also help sort of vet things better. But I think we probably overcorrected on it to start with, because you've taken the human element out of it. And so I could tell you personally, I ignore AI phone calls when they come through. Now put a filter on my phone to stop those calls from coming in. You're getting a lot more noise and job descriptions and resumes. And so I think we need to figure out a more efficient way to do this, because I think we've created a lot more noise in this experience. And so hopefully the next year that changes a little bit. Speaking of that, MSPs have gone through a lot of shifts as well. The world's tough right now because it's becoming more hands-on, and they're asking the MSPs to be more strategic. Yet there's pricing pressure, and the MSP business model is that they're in the business of making money. So if you're going to push the charges down, then they're going to have to replace the talent with maybe talent that's not as senior to support you. So how do they continue to become profitable? What do you think the value prop is going forward?
So I think me and Nancy were kind of talking about this the other day. I think there is a potential for a real opportunity for a delivery model shift, right? From being transactional into more strategic, right? So going back to digging into the spend and finding those rogue vendors and identifying them as staffing solutions, right, that the organization has used without your knowledge, building a program around that, right? Whether it's an MSP, internal MSP, or you're bringing on an MSP provider, right? You can still look at it as a solution that you're providing to the client. So you may not actually be an MSP provider, but you're looking at like, how do we drill, like bring all of this in and start to give you some visibility around this particular spend that you had no idea was even happening, and how do we make sure that you become compliant in what's going on within your organization. So again, changing it from a transaction model into something a bit more strategic, I think could be the new ecosystem for MSPs in general.
I love that.
Yeah, definitely the consulting side of that business model is critical. Going back to the need for relationships, right? Understanding who those main players are, locally and globally, all the way up the food chain, and solidifying your need to be at the table. Understanding that a program in place, it's been implemented. What are you doing year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5? How is that adapting to the current climate? How is that adapting to the new technologies? What can you offer, and what can you advise on? It's not just about getting more pieces of the pie. If you're starting in one location and looking to grow to the next, it's increasing those relationships. Obviously, you need to put more people in place with the larger volume, but where can you be more efficient? Where can you be more streamlined? I think that overhead has been looked at a lot over the last year since COVID, and understanding where we can kind of cut costs where the needs are, and where they just don't need to be.
Yeah, I know in my former role, when we went to RFP to look for an MSP solution, so our volume wasn't like too significant, right? So some of the bigger couldn't support the program. Like they weren't even interested in bidding on the RFP because it wasn't large enough. And then we had some of the more, I would say like mid-size and smaller MSP providers that were like, yeah, of course, we'll help you come up with a solution. We ended up going with an MSP provider that helped us strategize, right? So it was more of the value that they were adding and the consultative approach that they took for us than anything else, right? So I look at those larger MSP providers that said, no, thank you. They were looking for more of a transactional volume staffing type relationship, where what we actually needed was that relationship, consultative, strategic partner to help us build out that program.
Interesting.
I'd like to also comment, because that's perfect. But there could be more strategic alliances happening within the MSP world, not just with MSP to VMS, that's an obvious partnership if an MSP doesn't have their own technology. But we're still buying services, right? We're partnering with a company, but it's the people that sold it to us, the people that they're putting up front that we're most interested in.
Correct.
So if there is multiple proposals and presentations that are happening, that there's a combination. I think we need to be more open in kind of taking an a la carte type of approach, and figuring out a way that we can kind of piecemeal and work together in just a more efficient way. Bless you.
That's yeah.
I was trying to hold it in. I agree with that 100%. And I think there needs to be behavior that changes on the buyer side as well. So when you go and you ask for, strategy, consulting, all of this good stuff, but you're only willing to pay the transactional price, then you get what you pay for, right? If we're not challenging, we're trying to challenge the MSPs to be more strategic and consultative. And I think that's where we should be going. But then we're looking at pricing and we're saying, oh, well, that's way too expensive, right? So we kind of have to figure out, what's valuable. But then also on the MSP side, if you're coming in a little higher, your challenge is really to demonstrate that value.
Sure.
So, I would say there's an opportunity on both sides to really up the game. And I think that, with the introduction of AI this year, and getting deeper into it and kind of that messy middle that I talked about before, like, I think this conversation about MSPs in a traditional sense has been going on for a while. So I'm hoping that this is then the corner that kind of turns where there's this more, strategic lens that's being taken, and some of that transactional stuff is automated. And so we can actually focus on having that consultative partner, and not just hiring somebody just for transactional work that, we just don't want to do.
Nancy, I love that you brought that up, because I do think I have this phrase I tell clients all the time, because they want to, like, when they talk about trying to get their costs down, they're always focused on cost with MSP. Yeah. And I'm like, cheap or free sometimes ends up being more expensive, right? And so you need to look at your solution provider as a partner,
and it's a big, it's a long relationship. There isn't quick. You don't implement an MSP today and then switch it out in 12 months. Hopefully you don't, unless it's, really, really bad, right? But it's a lot of work to implement that. So you just have to be really, really thoughtful. And, if you want to buy a cheap used car, you can do that, but then you have to expect that there's going to be some cost to it down the line.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think there is more on delivery. Like, so if you think about, like, if I can get seats into your program faster, and if you're selling financial products, so that enables you to deliver those financial products to your customers faster, then you're increasing the revenue. So it's not always about cost savings. It's also about, like, how do I create more revenue quicker, right? And I think that shift needs to happen.
Yeah, the value add needs to always be there. But to Nancy's point, on the buyer side, I think there is a lot more that we can do to bring that out of our MSPs and partnerships, just by asking the questions and inviting them in and saying, this is what we're looking to do, and this is what we need. How can you support us? Is that something that you can do? Because there's been times where we'll hear something from a supplier, from a marketing email, or whatever the case may be, and it's like, oh, I didn't even know you did that. So a lot of education needs to happen on both sides.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like when you go to your doctor, if you're not 100% open and honest with them, how can they help you, right? And so when you're talking to a supplier, like, here's what we're facing. This is what we need to solution, or we don't necessarily know what we need to solution, but tell me what you can offer and what your capabilities are, so that I understand what my opportunities are with your services, right? So
Absolutely.
help me maybe think a little bit differently about where I'm going with my program or the structure of my program. Maybe there's something that you offer that's a better idea than what we've been discussing for the last couple of months internally, right? So it's really it's the onus is on both sides, right? To be open about what your needs are, but from a buyer's perspective, but from a sell side perspective, being very open about all of the options that are available and what that looks like and how that can contribute to the full scope of work that the buyer is currently facing.
I love the doctor example. I could tell you, like, I went to see a client, this is many years ago, and they had their own MSP program running, and then they had a shadow team they were building that was like going to replicate what the MSP was doing. So I'm like, if you're not happy with their MSP and you're not telling them what they need to get done, and you're building a shadow thing, of course you're not going to be happy with their delivery.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're not being honest about what needs to happen. So it's a partnership ultimately, you know. And it should be
I think from the buyer's seat too. I mean, if you're thinking about standing up an MSP program or replacing your MSP, really asking them how. So, everyone jokes about RFPs and how they suck, and, AI is just plunking in answers, and this is happening, right? So you're probably getting, at least 50% AI answers when you're getting an RFP back. So when you're having actual conversations with people, which again, it's, human cannot replace that from an AI perspective. Ask for examples. You bring value this way. How? Tell me, give me an example. How would that work? How does that apply to my organization? I think if you set the tone of, I'm looking for a consultative partner, I'm actually asking you the how, and you're not just giving me sales fluff, then you're going to start to clearly see the organizations that are driving down to the lowest price to get your business, and those organizations that really are going to bring their value. I will say too, props to you guys, Jacquelynn, for just saying, these large organization MSPs, they're not good for us, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. But just really like asking those specific questions. How? Give me an example. Because AI is fluffing those RFPs. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Today has been a really great conversation, enlightening. What are you most optimistic about the future of contingent?
For my program, definitely getting a lot more compliance and embedded within the program, and that should hopefully kind of shape the way where my supplier partners we're able to get a little bit more efficient in our buying channels. So that's what I'm most optimistic about.
And Dominic, I love that you're also standardizing the process, right? Because I think that was also part of compliance is important, but also like making sure there's a standard way to buy from
it's a long road. It's a very, very long road. But yeah, I don't have a leg to stand on if I don't have the policies in place and where we need to fall back on. So and be able to direct these stakeholders into that channel. So
I love that. Jacquelynn?
I think for me, it's just more about building the structure around like the vendor management piece, right? And really building up the program as a strategic, like, I don't know what the word I want to use is, like a workforce pillar, essentially, of, like our TA team, essentially. Like, I think that there is going to be, and not just for me, but across the board, companies seeing that there is a need to invest in getting a handle around the vendor management, the supplier management, and bringing it to a more mature and sophisticated level for their organizations.
Love it. And Nancy?
Yeah, I agree. I think the role of the CW buyer within an enterprise, whether it's someone who's doing it today or someone who's yet to be identified and it's going to fall into their lap, it's going to be a need. And with all the complexities, it's definitely going to be elevated. I love that. I love that we're having this conversation in a way where we're asking questions about what could be new and different. When you stick AI in and you stick all of the other things in, I love talking about this stuff, and I love seeing how organizations are thinking differently. And so I'm looking forward to the evolution of the CW ecosystem. I think this is our opportunity to shine. And I think we finally have some tech tools that can help us get there as well.
For sure.
Definitely. Well, thank you all. This was such an enlightful conversation. I really appreciate that you all went through and were transparent, and we had deep conversations rather than like just kind of cursory going over the high level issues, So I think that's how we all learn from each other. So that was super insightful. And I hope we do this again.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.